States Alliance (AES) have begun a joint military exercise in northwestern Niger as part of a two-week regional training to combat terrorism.
In the remote sands of Tilia, Niger, something historic is unfolding. 5 African nations have launched a massive joint military operation led by the Alliance of Sahel States. It's not just a drill, it's a message. But who are they targeting? Why is a coastal nation like Togo suddenly joining the fight? And what does this mean for the future of West Africa? Let's find out, but before we go, don't forget to like and share this video if you want Ibrahim Traoré to succeed. Long before boots hit the ground in Tilia, the Alliance of Sahel States (AES) had already made its most defining move, not with tanks, but with paperwork. In January 2024, Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger walked away from ECOWAS, the Economic Community of West African States. For many in the international community, it looked like a reckless gamble. But for those watching from Bamako, Ouagadougou, or Nanam, it was something else entirely. It was liberation. For years, these nations had played by ECOWAS rules, attending summits, following sanctions, and enduring lectures on democracy from wealthier coastal elites. Meanwhile, their towns were being overrun by militants. Their borders were bleeding. Their people were dying. And all they got in return were press statements and embargoes. The promise of regional unity had soured into a system where the most insecure countries were the most isolated. So they left. But exiting ECOWAS wasn't just about politics. It was about survival. Without the burden of endless diplomacy or dependence on foreign troops, the AES trio was free to do what ECOWAS never could: build a military alliance rooted in shared danger, not diplomatic fiction. That's the story behind what's happening now in Tilia. These joint drills aren't spontaneous. They are the first visible product of a deeper long-planned strategy, the creation of an African security bloc with its doctrine, its battlefield rhythm, and most importantly, its command. The Tarha Nakal 2025 exercise is part of that larger shift. It's not just a show of power, it's a signal of rebirth. The name itself, Tarha Nakal, or love of country, was chosen not to sound poetic, but to remind troops that this fight is personal. These aren't mercenaries. These are men and women defending their own homes, towns, and borders. And Tilia wasn't picked by accident either. Located near a tribal zone infamous for insurgent ambushes, Tilia was once a hot spot of fear. Now it's being transformed into a launchpad of resistance. The town's military facility, once dusty and under-equipped, has evolved into a regional training hub capable of hosting coordinated operations between multiple nations with barracks, command centers, and airstrip access. All refurbished not by outside contractors, but by local military engineers. The symbolism matters. This is AES soil built by AES hands for an AES future. But even more intriguing is who showed up. The presence of Chadian troops is expected. Chad has long been a counterinsurgency heavyweight in the region. But Togo's appearance turned heads. A coastal nation far removed from Sahel's desert wars had every excuse to sit this one out. Instead, it deployed elite units eager to train and coordinate with AES counterparts. And that's the shift. The war is no longer confined to the Sahel. Fear has spilled south, crossing borders, threatening stability in nations once considered immune. Togo's inclusion shows that the front lines are expanding, and so must the alliances. But this growing unity didn't come easily. It took years of frustration, betrayal, and blood. What you see today in Tilia is not just strategy. It's trauma turned into doctrine. These nations were pushed into each other's arms by a world that often ignored them. And now they're finding strength in that very rejection. Their drills are not polished. Their gear is not always new. But what they lack in shine, they make up for in resolve. That resolve is being tested and hardened in the heat of the Tilia Desert. And as soldiers coordinate more rescues, joint patrols, and anti-insurgency operations in synchrony, is a deeper layer that is unfolding, and this is a political shift hidden within a military maneuver. Because behind every formation, every maneuver, and every encrypted radio call is a bigger question. Can African nations create their defense system without asking for permission? And if it stands that way, What happens to the old power structures built on the assumption that they never would? The soldiers marching through the Tilia dust are not rehearsing old tactics. They're scripting new ones. Unlike past regional drills that mimicked Western-led counterinsurgency operations, Tarha Nakel 2025 is built on a philosophy that challenges everything West Africa has been taught about fighting instability. What's happening in Niger is not just a military event. It's a strategic revolution. And at the heart of it lies a bold conviction. Africa cannot rely on borrowed war strategies to fight African wars. To understand this shift, you have to understand what's being replaced. For decades, military training in West Africa was shaped by outside powers, primarily France, the US, and the EU. The blueprints for training, the metrics for success, the language of command, it all came from somewhere else. Even when troops wore national flags, their tactics often wore the fingerprint of Paris or Washington. But AES doesn't want that anymore. It's not just breaking from foreign influence. It's redefining what a soldier should be. Tarha Nakel isn't about staging a fake war. It's about engineering a real unified combat culture. One that reflects the terrain, the enemy, and the psychological toll of warfare in the Sahel. The drills don't just teach how to raid an insurgent camp. They focus on how to survive in a zone with no backup, no medevac, and no clean lines between civilian and combatant. AES commanders have emphasized decentralized field leadership, field improvisation, and crossbar maneuverability. Troops are trained to operate fluidly between states, crossing invisible colonial borders without waiting for bureaucratic clearance because insurgents don't wait either. More strikingly, command training is multilingual, incorporating French, Hausa, not as a token gesture, but because operational success demands linguistic flexibility in areas where tribal dynamics determine their survival. This marks a complete departure from older drills where soldiers could barely communicate with locals in the villages they were meant to defend. Then there's the urban module new to Tarha Nakel. In a region where the fear threat is bleeding from bushlands into towns, AES forces are training for urban sieges, hostage rescues, and infrastructure defense, including energy grids and border checkpoints. The inclusion of such simulations shows a long-term vision. AES isn't just chasing insurgents anymore. It's building the muscle to govern territory, but it doesn't stop at guns and formations. Tarha Nakel's most radical addition is psychological operations SHOCKS designed to rebuild trust between militaries and the populations they serve. After years of failed missions, civilians across Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso often see soldiers as invaders rather than protectors. AES knows that without public support, no war can be won. So they're crafting community engagement campaigns, anti-disinformation teams, and even rural outreach simulations to reverse that narrative. This shift isn't accidental. It's based on battlefield realities that AES armies have lived through. They've watched villages fall, not because they lacked weapons, but because they lacked local intelligence and popular cooperation. They've seen well-funded foreign-trained units collapse under ambushes because they couldn't adapt to non-linear warfare. The kind of war that uses motorbikes instead of tanks and rumor instead of radio. AES is now doing something no Western partner ever thought to do. They're studying the enemy not as a military problem, but as a social organism. The drills include sessions on how insurgent groups recruit, how they exploit grievances, and how they infiltrate weak border economies. AES is training soldiers not just to fight, but to understand what feeds the fight. And that's what makes Tarha Nakel so revolutionary. It is not about copying NATO tactics. It's about building an African war doctrine that matches African realities. There's a line AES officers have started repeating quietly. We're not fighting an insurgency. We're fighting the conditions that make insurgency look like a solution. That line alone says more than any summit or statement ever could. Still, questions linger. Philosophy is one thing. Implementation is another. As this doctrine evolves, can it scale? Can it withstand pressure? And more importantly, can it hold when the front line moves into places that were never expected to see war? Because that's exactly what's happening now. For decades, Togo sat quietly on West Africa's coast, small, stable, and shielded from the Sahel's fires. Its capital Loum basked in ocean breezes, while its inland neighbors burned under the weight of insurgency. In the geopolitical chessboard of the region, Togo wasn't even considered a player. But that illusion ended the moment the militants came knocking. In the last 2 years, a silent infiltration crept across Togo's northern border. Fighters are crossing from Burkina Faso into sparsely monitored villages, blending into communities and launching sporadic attacks on local officials and border patrols. What started as whispers of unrest soon became something unmistakable: insurgent encroachment on the Atlantic coast. For the Togolese government, it was a nightmare scenario. This wasn't just about bombs or bullets. It was about identity. Togo had built its reputation on being a haven of calm in a region known for coups, rebellions, and French military operations. Now that buffer was crumbling, but instead of playing defense, Togo did the unthinkable. It deployed troops into a war zone it had never been part of. It joined Tarhan Nakel 2025, becoming the first coastal West African nation to formally participate in AES joint operations. This wasn't diplomacy. This was self-preservation. Togo's military elite knows that borders are fiction to militants. The same fighters who pillage villages in eastern Burkina Faso are now laying traps in Savins, the country's northernmost region. If Togo didn't act, the conflict would soon be at the gates of Ka, maybe even Lomé. So, it took the war north before the war could come south. But there's a deeper layer to this decision, one that signals a tectonic shift in the regional security mindset. Togo no longer trusts traditional security frameworks to protect it. The Economic Community of West African States, ECOWAS, had mechanisms on paper, early warning systems, peacekeeping mandates, border patrol proposals, but they moved at the speed of politics, not violence. The AES, by contrast, offered something radical: action without apology. And Togo, watching the clock run out, chose speed over structure. Its military dispatch to Tilia wasn't just symbolic. It brought specialized rapid response units trained in both conventional defense and counter-guerrilla tactics. These aren't passive observers. Togo's forces are actively engaging in the exercises, studying the Joint Command System AES is developing, and even testing out new crossbar pursuit protocols, something ECOWAS protocols never allowed. For Togolese defense strategists, Tarhan Nakel is a live laboratory here. They aren't just learning how to defend rural villages. They're preparing to protect key infrastructure, coastal roads, and trade arteries, the veins of a country whose economy depends heavily on the free flow of goods from the interior to the ports. And there's a psychological angle too. By showing up in Tilia, Togo is telling the region, we see what's coming and we're not waiting to become the next headline. It's a warning to other coastal nations, Benin, Ghana, even Ivory Coast, that the ocean won't save them. The conflict is no longer bound by the Sahel belt. It's metastasizing. But Togo's participation also reveals something else, something AES has quietly hoped for. Its security doctrine is contagious. When Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso allied, critics dismissed it as a junta club. 3 newborn governments huddling together in rebellion against democratic norms. But when a constitutional democracy like Togo joins their war games, it reframes the narrative. It suggests that the alliance isn't about ideology. It's about geography and threat perception. And perhaps that's what makes this moment so dangerous and so powerful. Because even stable nations like Togo are adopting AES's methods, which it suggests a broader shift. West Africa's security logic is being rewritten not in conference rooms but in combat zones. So the question now isn't why Togo is involved. The real question is who's next? Guinea, Benin, Senegal. Because if one coastal state joins, others may follow. And when enough dominoes fall, a regional alliance becomes a continental movement. But every movement needs structure. And AES knows that military success can't survive without political backing and strategic infrastructure. Which brings us to the next chapter, the rise of the AES security architecture, and how it's quietly replacing everything which ECOWAS failed to become. When 3 countries walked out of ECOWAS, few expected them to walk into something stronger. Mali, Burkina Faso and Niger were ridiculed in international circles for forming the Alliance of Sahel States. AES branded as a rebellious coalition of newborn regimes with no real plan. But behind closed doors in bunkers and command centers far from Western embassies, a new architecture was quietly being designed. Not just for cooperation, but for power projection. What AES is building now isn't just a military agreement. It's a new regional security ecosystem, and its blueprint is not borrowed from France, the UN or ECOWAS. It's something else entirely, a sovereign self-reliant security bloc unburdened by donor strings and diplomatic red tape. At the heart of this structure is a 5,000-strong joint force, an integrated army composed of infantry, aerial units, special forces, and mobile intelligence teams. Unlike ECOWAS, peacekeeping operations which are ad hoc and approval-bound, this AES force is designed to be permanent with its. Each country contributes men, machinery, and intelligence, but decisions are made collectively, not dictated from outside capitals. The AES force isn't defensive. It's preemptive. It is being trained to strike beyond borders, pursue enemies across state lines, and operate under a unified doctrine that treats the Sahel as one strategic theater, not a patchwork of nation-states. This is radical departure from past African military alignments, which were often scattered, slow, and reactive. ECOWAS had rapid deployment plans on paper, but by the time they were activated, towns had already fallen. AES is determined not to make that mistake. Its motto is unspoken but unmistakable. We won't wait for another region to burn before we move. To make this model work, AES is building infrastructure that goes beyond barracks and bullets. In each member state, centralized command nodes are being developed, linked through secure communication systems and regional surveillance tech. Most of it sourced not from NATO stockpiles, but from alternative partners willing to trade on equal footing. This brings us to the geopolitical elephant in the room, Russia. As ECOWAS tightens its relationship with France and the EU, AES has turned eastward. Military delegations from Moscow have been spotted in Ouagadougou and Bamako, holding quiet meetings with defense ministers and top generals. Russian advisors are reportedly embedded in training units, providing expertise on asymmetric warfare, drone integration and psychological operations, skills honed in Syria and Ukraine, now being localized for Sahelian terrain. But AES isn't naively jumping from one master to another. It's playing chess, not checkers. Russia may be a weapons supplier, but AES retains strategic autonomy. Unlike France, Moscow hasn't demanded basing rights or economic concessions in return. The relationship for now is transactional security for respect, and that respect matters. After decades of being treated as pawns in Western counterinsurgency experiments, AES leaders want partnerships that treat them as equals, not liabilities. Whether that will hold in the long run is uncertain, but for now, it has given the alliance breathing room to develop its own military identity. Part of that identity includes civic protection protocols where AES forces are trained not just to neutralize threats but to stabilize zones afterwards, setting up local governance frameworks, restoring services, and securing infrastructure. The idea is to not just clear territory but hold and govern it effectively, something foreign troops repeatedly failed to do. Internally, the alliance is investing in youth military ties with joint curricula designed to train the next generation of officers in the AES doctrine. These cadets are being taught not only tactics but geopolitics, counter-narrative messaging, and anti-insurgency economics. They are being raised to understand that security isn't just about warfare. It's about nation building under fire. And the results are starting to show. Since its formation, AES operations have already reclaimed rural zones that were once insurgent strongholds, restored trade corridors previously shut by violence, and even reopened local markets that had been abandoned for years. The vision is clear. AES isn't aiming to manage chaos. It's aiming to end it. And in doing so, it is quietly positioning itself as the continent's most dynamic security initiative with a model that others may soon imitate. Because in a region where alliances have often meant dependence, AES is making a different kind of promise. We won't ask to be defended. We'll become the defense. But even the strongest architecture needs a foundation, which is public trust. Without the people, no force can govern it. Which brings us to the final and most difficult front in this war. The hearts and minds of the civilians living between bullets and banners. A soldier can reclaim land, but only people can hold it. This is the lesson the Alliance of Sahel States AES is finally putting into practice after years of watching foreign-led campaigns collapse not from firepower failure, but from a lack of connection. The most advanced weapons, the best trained commandos, and the smartest tactics mean nothing if the people don't believe in the flag that follows them. Which is why as AES drills turn more sophisticated, another layer is being built quietly beneath them. A war for legitimacy. A war not fought with rifles, but with radios, village meetings, and repaired wells. Because even the most impressive military formation will dissolve if villagers see soldiers as looters, occupiers, or corrupt extensions of distant capitals. In many parts of Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso, that was the story for years. Armed men showed up with promises, then they left. Or worse, they stayed and made things worse. AES wants to change that, and it knows it must, or everything else will crumble.
So, how is it doing this?
It starts with civil-military fusion teams. Units embedded not to conduct raids, but to engage directly with communities. These teams trained under the AES doctrine arrive in recently secured areas to do more than hold the perimeter. They reopen clinics, facilitate the return of displaced families, and establish direct communication with local chiefs and religious leaders. But unlike past initiatives funded by foreign NGO or UN agencies, these teams wear national insignias. Their message is subtle but powerful. We are not guests, we are your army. This shift has a psychological edge. In regions where state presence has long been abstract, sometimes existing only as a rumor, AES is planting something rare, visible, reliable authority.
And that makes a difference.
A clinic operating again under military protection sends a louder message than any speech ever could. Yet hearts and minds are not won with aid alone. They win with honesty. That's why AES is also investing in something that previous regimes and outside forces avoided, which is military accountability. Field commanders are now required to file community conduct reports, logs that document interactions with civilians, disputes resolved, and grievances registered. In some high-risk zones, independent monitors, often retired civil servants or local educators, are embedded with units to serve as neutral observers. Also investing in strategic communication across AES-controlled zones. Community radio stations are being reactivated to spread updates not just about security operations but about markets reopening, schooling schedules, and peace dialogues. The broadcasts are conducted in local dialects such as Pulaar, Zarma, and Doon, and not French or English. It's a symbolic reversal. 4 years' information in these regions came from international agencies translated down from top-level press releases. Now the news is homegrown, grassroots, and controlled by the communities themselves, with AES simply acting as the shield. Even the naming of operations is being localized. The term Taranakal isn't military jargon. It's an emotional language. It says we're not just fighting for the state. We're fighting for something we love. This cultural re-entering is key. Because you don't hold land with tanks, you hold it with trust.
And trust is built with memory.
The memory of who stood by you when your home was overrun. The memory of who showed up not just with guns, but with food, medicine, and a plan to help you stay. Of course, none of this is easy. AES still operates in regions riddled with ethnic tensions, resource scarcity, and political distrust. Warlords still roam, and some villages remain hostile, not because they support insurgents, but because they've simply stopped believing anyone offers a better future.
That's the real battle.
But if AES loses this one, all the command centers, joint drills, and 5,000-strong armies won't mean a thing. Because this isn't about morality, it's about control. Yet, despite the odds, Burkina Faso is not folding. Instead of foreign dependency, it's investing in local military production. Instead of IMF loans, it's partnering with new global players offering deals without strings. And instead of appeasing critics, it's building a new political culture where the army, civilians, and traditional leaders co-govern in survival mode. It's messy, it's raw, and it's entirely African. And maybe that's what scares the world the most, that a small landlocked nation defying all expectations could teach others to do the same. Because if Burkina Faso can fight insurgents, resist coups, navigate ethnic tensions, survive sanctions, and still chart its path, then what excuse do other nations have? This is more than a regional crisis. It's a political revolution hiding in plain sight. And now the world must decide, will it support African independence or continue to attack it under the banner of fighting insurgency? Do you think Traoré will be able to fight insurgency alone? Should Africans step up? Let us know in the comments section. What can you do to save your country? Do you want to watch more videos like this one? If so, subscribe to our channel and press the bell icon next to it. We have decided to bring videos on something nobody talks about. The black culture, civilization, history, and evidence about how glorious blacks have been. Thanks for watching, and until the next video, stay tuned.